Hello, my name is Vicente Puga, and I'm with Group 15. And behind the camera is Andrew, and Emmett is sick, so rest in peace, Emmett. So our project goal was to measure or our question was, does the angle of this solar cell determine how much energy we detect from the sun? And so we went about that by attaching one solar cell to the servo motor here, which is connected to another servo motor down here. So this will vary the angle that this solar cell faces the sun. So this servo motor down here turns this way, and this one up here turns this way. And we call them one theta, and we call them one phi. And so we also have this stationary solar cell down here, which is sort of our control solar cell. It tells us the base energy that you would record if the solar cell was just stationary, not moving at all. So we can compare that value to this one that's moving. All right, so opening it up and looking inside of our little casing here, we have the most important thing is probably the SD card, which is how we collected our data. And we'll talk about it later, but it's also how it messed up the entire project for us. And yeah, all those servo motors are connected to the Arduino, and the SD card is also connected to the Arduino. We collect power using the wall brick, and we also have this connected to the computer so we can upload our code. Yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. The sun. So this entire week has been incredibly cloudy. So obviously we can't collect data from the sun because there is no sun. However, we made our own, or someone else did, and we're using it. So this is the sun, quote unquote, that we use to measure the solar energy that the solar cell collects. So as you can see, this is how we had our whole setup, and that's our stationary solar cell, and this is our moving one. So right now it's a little dead, but usually it will be moving about this axis and this axis, collecting different data from this sun. And we use that data and put it through MATLAB, get a plot, and figure out if there's any point or any angle that this faces that collects the most data from the sun compared to this one.
All right, so here's our code for our project. First, we just initialize a bunch of stuff. We include the libraries for our servo and SD card, define our servos, define the pins for the servos, and the angles we're going to be writing to when we loop through them later. So in our setup, we attach our servos to the right servo pins. We begin the serial communication. We write the variables that we're recording into the serial port, and then we open the SD card and then write those same variables into the SD card. In our loop, we just loop through the theta angles and phi angles. We have a nested for loop to do that, and each time we get to a new theta and phi, we use this move servos functions, which is made right down here, that passes in the theta and phi angle and writes them to the servos. Next, we just delay to let it set to those angles, and then after that, we loop through 5 times and print the data we're collecting to the SD card and to the serial port using this collect and print data and write data to file functions. You can see down here that what those actually print out are the voltage, which is calculated by mapping from the 1024 10-bit register value to a 0 to 5 volt value. Then we print out the theta and phi angle, the time that has elapsed, and those voltages. And that is all that we've done.
All right, now that you saw Vinny show a quick demonstration of our SD card working and seeing the data we saved for our SD card, we now realize that our SD card was giving us a lot of issues with data collection. So in order to troubleshoot this, we had to just omit our SD card data in the long run because what we think is probably either the power settings with the SD card powering servos as well through the board, or with corrupted data, possibly from bad code or from just other issues of the Arduino, or from just issues of, again, power stalling the operation of the Arduino. We're not sure. But anyway, we took our good data from our serial monitor and were able to save as much of it as we could into a new folder, which does correctly display all of our data. Here we have our theta angle in our ones column, our phi angle in our twos column. Then we have our time that each was measured in milliseconds, which would be useful for outside. However, we can't control our experiment outdoors because of the clouds. And then 4, we have our voltage readings from our solar panel that moves and rolls. And then we have our flat solar panel giving very consistent data. However, one thing we'll notice is when we scroll down to any of our 90 positions, while this is consistent, our other panel, when at 90 degrees, we expect to see a similar reading to our static panel. However, since it's not static, in plotting our data, we decided to omit our second static panel and instead just compare voltage angles due to the servo arm with our just voltage readings from that solar cell, just to make sure that our hardware is not giving us different readings and that our results are a little more accurate. Looking again at our data, here we have 4 points taken at each position, and then we average all of those points, in which here we have extracting all of our major data, taking the average of our points to get our best value for it, and then plotting new theoretical values for our voltages. And then below, we again plotted all of that onto a figure. So now, looking at our data, we have this great data showing with the titles representing our theta angles in correspondence to our rotation around the z-axis, and our roll with our phi angle denoted on the x-axis. And what we'll notice is we have pretty nice data that actually shows a really good correlation between the angle of our solar cells and the compared angle to the sun that we simulated in our experiment. And what we'll notice when we had a static 90-degree angle, we had a really consistent for all of our 90-degree readings, pretty stable. And then what we'll also notice is that for different positions, we even measured points where we found even more optimal angles to direct our solar panel. And this shift seems to correspond with our angle, as this parabola seems to move left as we continue to increase our angle, which corresponds with the motion of our experiment. Again, this is the data, not from the SD card, but from what we best could collect from the serial monitor due to the SD card reading issues.
All right, so I was mentioning before that the SD card kind of ruined all our data collection. Well, why? Well, let's look at the data we got when we put the SD card in. So here's our data, right? First column is the theta angle, the phi angle, and then this is time. Don't really worry about that one. This is the voltage of the moving solar cell, and this is the voltage of the stationary solar cell. So it looks pretty good, right? This is decent voltage, decent phi angles. And then, if you keep looking through, something weird happens. Because we did not rotate it 589 degrees. So obviously the SD card did not make our data work well. It messed up our data collection, and so it pretty much made anything after this point unusable. But we accounted for this, and here's the stuff we have saved from our SD card that we wrote using the Arduino. And we knew that this would happen because of previous work with the SD card that messed up our entire stuff before. So we did it before that with just a computer. And here's the data we got. Much nicer. We don't get any weird angles. Everything is perfect, and it looks great.
So, to continue along with the process video, we got to return to our initial setup. So here it is, the regular setup powered. Right now we have the wall or attached to the power brick, but we are disconnected from our laptop in this case. Right now we have the SD card reader attached as well. However, you will notice that it is not currently drawing any power, but that is again due to not being connected to the computer and not having the proper code run. One of the issues, however, that we learned very shortly, or very quickly perhaps, in our project, is that servo motors are not fun to work with. So these servo motors are 9-gram SG90 micro servo controls. These servo motors draw about 5 volts of power, we read, but we didn't know the current consumption, and we had assumed incorrectly that we could power and run these servo motors from our breadboard connected to Arduino, powered from the wall brick along with USB power. What we soon learned is that these servo motors draw way too much power, and that caused a lot of issues, especially when connecting back to our SD card. In fact, one of the issues right now we are dealing with is a really faulty servo motor. So in this case, if we just take this servo motor, right now we have the board powered and everything connected to the right pins. This servo motor is not working as it should, as right now we are getting way too many turns and it refuses to listen to our output code. And then as you notice, while this one is connected, our other motor is also currently connected, yet we are not getting the same weird behavior of the constant turning. That's one of our issues we noticed. Second issue is if you see this small LED on the Uno board, on the Uno Arduino board, when we have everything connected and we are trying to run power into our SD card, what we'll notice is the light starts to get dimmer, and what we're realizing is that when everything is put in place with our SD card reading, we are drawing just way too much power again from the board, and that is causing issues with the potentiometers inside the servos, giving us all kind of janky motion.
Alright, so like we were mentioning before, when we added the SD card, things got a little funky. So we discovered, as Andrew says later on, that this is due to the power distribution. So apparently the servo motors cannot be sufficiently powered by the Arduino when the Arduino is also powering the SD card. So we figured out a couple ways to get around this, or at least we tried to. Here's another Arduino that Andrew provided that we connected to another breadboard that we hooked up to the servo motors. And this worked for a little bit, but eventually it just gave out as well. Our assumptions were that the servo motors at this point were just completely fried and would just not work no matter what kind of power you supplied to them. This is another sort of power supply that we haven't tried because we didn't have the batteries for it. In the future, we will now know that the servo motors require power from an outside source that isn't the Arduino. So we can use another Arduino or a battery supply like this and just start the experiment off with that from the get-go instead of trying to use everything the Arduino, or use all the power that the Arduino supplies.